Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Trade and Tariff webinar series. We are so glad you could join us after yesterday's technical difficulties. Perhaps the silver lining with that is that there were a lot of changes overnight that we can now speak to you all about. So again, welcome. My name is Ashley. I'll be your host. Before we dive in, I just have a few housekeeping items that you're familiar with if you've joined before. First, a friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal or tax advice. On your screen is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review that. We are recording today's event. You'll receive the recording later today. The console you're looking at can be customized, so feel free to move or resize the windows. The additional resources section contains a lot of great related resources, including the slide deck. There are several ways to engage with presenters and your fellow attendees today. First, if you have any questions, you can submit them using the Ask a Question box. We will try and save time at the end and throughout the presentation for Q&A. You can also submit your troubleshooting questions there. Second, you can join our attendee chat. There is an icon along the bottom of your screen with 2 chat bubbles. Click that and it will pop up on your screen. We encourage you to introduce yourself, network, and discuss today's topic. Third, you can react to the presentation by clicking the emoji icon and reacting. And then lastly, a reminder that this webinar is designed to be quick and interactive, so therefore it is not eligible for CPE credit. All right, let's meet our presenters. We're actually joined by quite a few Avalarians today. We are joined by Scott Peterson, VP of Government Relations, George Tranchis, Senior Director, Global Marketplaces, Patrick Frith, Senior Director of Growth for Cross-Border. And then we're also joined by our usual Shane Bogdan, and we have some other people helping out on the back end answering questions. So we've got a good group here today. That is all I have for housekeeping. So I will pass it over to the group.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. As we were supposed to go live yesterday, Shane was actually not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be with his wife having a baby, but it is delayed today. So unlike Trump tariffs, which never miss a beat, Shane, why don't you take it away today, your last day till you go out for a couple months?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, George. And so no, thanks everybody. And I think fair warning across the board here, all of this stuff is happening in real time. These slides were put together within the past 24 hours. And as everybody is well aware, a lot of the news has been changing rapidly within this period of time. So some of these numbers we will be correcting on the spot. But let's kick off with the first one here, which is also going to get a revision here. So what is the projected average tariff on Chinese imports commencing on April 9th, which being today? And I'm just going to do a few seconds on this one because this has already been, let me click it over. This is already completely changed across the board here. So let's just give it 3 seconds and we'll go straight to the poll results. All right, nobody has updated this yet, but here's what I will tell you. The correct answer is none of these. The correct answer currently right now is 124%. And let me just quickly walk you through the math on how we got there. So as everybody has been well aware, February through March, there has been a 10% increase on Chinese goods by the United States government. This was increased to 20% in March. As everybody knows, last week on April 2nd, there was an additional 34%. So math right here, 20, 34%, we're now at 54%. Now that 34% as of the past 24 hours has changed to 84%. They added additional 50% on that. So if you're seeing the news outlets right now, it's stating 104%. Here's the piece that it's not being reported on. If everybody knows, back in 2018, there were about an additional 20% tariffs on Chinese goods enacted with Trump's last administration, which also continued over to Biden's administration. So if you take everything from 2018 to basically the past 12 hours, we're currently looking at around 124%. So the 70% I had on there from 24 hours ago is now out the window. We're now looking at 124% here. So for those of you that have continued to join us week over week, thank you, thank you, thank you. We're getting amazing attendees week over week. We're looking at all the comments. We're trying to make sure none of this material is stale, which how could anything be stale in the current state of trade here? But as everybody knows, basically on February 1st, all of this started changing. And it was really based around the fact of the flow of fentanyl and illegal migration. This has now kind of changed narratives as of April 2nd. You can see the 3 bullets here. Why the whiplash on this trade? Well, it's these 3 pieces. Trade deficits were deemed a national emergency by President Trump. They want to make sure that U.S. is dependent on foreign goods. And then also that piece around fentanyl and illegal migrants, which we'll talk about more so when it comes into de minimis coming up. Now, the timeline here, again, for those of you who have been joining us over the past 9+ weeks, we're not going to belabor this. I believe everybody gets these slides after. I'm going to quickly jot through these, but just key dates here. February 1st is when this all kicked off. Canada, Mexico, China were the first countries that were really on the block here. 25% to Canada, 25% to Mexico, 10% to China. All of this changed within 48 hours. Those got revoked, basically got pushed to March 4th. De minimis came into play basically for 48 hours as well. But due to the volume that was coming through, President Trump basically had to restate de minimis, basically said until adequate systems are in play. So just mark that as a bookmark here because we're going to revisit that. All of these, the Canada and Mexico were then pushed to March 4th. So let's just fast forward here. March 4th, these were then supposed to come into play. Negotiations were made, and basically it was deemed that anything coming in from Canada and Mexico under USMCA would be deemed, would not be hit with 25% tariff. So quick stat here, 30% of goods coming into Canada are eligible for USMCA. 50% of goods from Mexico being imported to the United States are eligible for USMCA. So again, 70% of goods coming in from Canada to the US are not eligible, and the other 50% as well. During this time frame, though, we started to hear these rumblings about April 2nd. Then it started being coined Liberation Day. Additional tariffs then started to be announced, such as on March 2nd, 25% on steel and aluminum across various countries here. Canada then started enacting their own reciprocal tariffs on us. So there was an original $30 billion on March 4th on U.S. goods. And then on March 13th here for Canada, there was an additional $30 billion on U.S. goods to Canada. So in total here, putting our math hats back on, there's now $60 billion worth of U.S. goods to Canada that are now facing reciprocal tariffs. March 26th here then, we have Venezuela, the announcement of Venezuela, that 25% tariff on any countries that are buying oil and gas from Venezuela. And again, restating this whole piece around April 2nd, this Liberation Day piece. Last week, if you joined us, we had 2 sessions, one on Tuesday right before, and then one on Thursday, April 3rd, where we basically went through as quickly as possible what we could gain from the media and what was announced, new tariffs that were coming across the board. So the big pieces here were obviously China, which was going to be increased to 34% at that time, a sweeping 10% across all countries, and then around 60 other countries that had a variety of tariffs across the board. April 7th here, then we're seeing that there was the threat of the additional 50% instead of the 34% on Chinese goods. Obviously, we know that's now in effect, and in total from the polling question, we're around 124%. So to summarize this all, we'll go to the next slide, and George and Patrick, I'll let you guys take this one over here. Just in relation to Liberation Day, I already know, the China rate that we have on here now already needs to be updated, but I'll let you guys kind of walk through this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Shane. So just bring your attention, I suppose, first to the baseline, bottom right of this slide. So that went into effect on the 5th of April. That was last week, 10% for everyone, okay? In addition, what came into effect last night at 1 minute past midnight was the so-called worst offenders. All right, so you see, this is not an exhaustive list. You see, we've got the main ones here on the left-hand side of this chart. There was 59 countries that had additional reciprocal tariffs imposed on them. And yes, as you pointed out, Shane, China was at 34%, and that's gone now to 104 plus, as high as 120 in some cases for China. So we're seeing already a chart that was up to date yesterday, which is now 24 hours later out of date. And of course, China are going to respond and have already said they're going to respond by imposing a further 50% to take that up to 84% for products coming going from the US into China. So remarkable situation we have on that particular trade lane, one of the biggest trade lanes on the planet, China, US, US, China, where we are seeing this incredible spike of tariffs and the cost of goods to that destination country. I can only think it's going to have an impact on the actual capacity. Okay, I mean, products are just going to slow down. They're just going to, people aren't going to be sending things backwards and forwards across that trade lane. So you're talking about ships, which won't be full. Belly space on aircraft won't be full. Sometimes belly space on a commercial aircraft between the two countries can account for 10-15% of the flight revenue. So then when you remove that, the economics of the flight come into question. So the implications here on global trade are just are incredible. George?
Yeah, Patrick, I'm going to advance to the slide. We sort of tried to make this a little easier. That was the Trump sort of chart. This is the Avalara chart. So don't blame us for these things. We're just trying to make it a little easier to read. I'm not going to harp on details, but this is already out of date, as we said. So we loaded these up yesterday for the webinar, and it got delayed, and then changes happened. So I think we're already seeing this impact. I think I saw Land Rover, Jaguar are not going to move cars to America right now. We're getting a lot of these questions. Shane and Patrick, one of the questions I've seen a couple times now is if you've got a mixed good order, so you've got an order from China, let's just say it lives in Canada, coming into the US. One is COO China, one is COO UK. The de minimis will apply appropriately on each item. So you want to make sure your line item, your CI is out correctly with COO and HS codes. Anything else you would recommend, Patrick? You spent a lot of time in the shipping world in your life. How else would you recommend to help solve this problem for them?
Yeah, well, I see the question number 5 here from Susan Will, and I was just quickly reading it then. So if you do have a mixed shipment, and this is one entry, 500 from China, 500 from the UK in this example, you're already over $800. So that would be a dutiable shipment, and the tariffs 10% UK, remember. Plus now China at 104% plus would then apply to that particular entry, that particular individual shipment. If you were to send 2 shipments, one from China and then the other shipment was from the UK, 500, the 500 UK shipment would go in under de minimis, 800, that's not impacted, but the China shipment would get pulled, and the 104 plus% would apply to that $500 country of origin China shipment. So it will all depend on how you're shipping these mixed goods. If it's on one airway bill, then the de minimis rules over 800 are going to apply, and duty will have to be paid on those shipments.
And Shane, on another couple of questions we're getting in at a sort of high rate. So apologize, we're not going to be answer all these real time, even though we have a lot of people on the call to help out.
And George, hold on before you go into this question. The other key piece here is CBP did announce the other day that for any of these goods coming in from China, as well as these other countries, that by a line item they're going to have what that specific good is and the applicable duty rate that's going to be applied to that good already ready to go. That they've already pre-calculated what that rate's going to be.
Yeah. So what about stuff on the water today? So it left a week ago, hasn't made it to port yet.
It hasn't been the port, and it's still it is not part of this based upon the current piece the other day. If it hasn't been the port yet, yes, it is. Nothing has been applied to this at the current moment.
But you're going to have to prove that the ship left before the tariffs took effect. So the 9th of April, the 5th of April, those are the dates when things came in. If your ship departed and you've got a departure certificate to prove, then you should not. This will not be applicable to those ships.
I'm going to date myself, but I remember the Hunt for Red October. They had satellite images of the Russian warships powering up their engines. We're going to have to use satellite imaging of the engines to make sure they actually left port on time. But who knows? Well, this will be a great question. I'm sure there's going to be some lawsuits on this one as well, by the way, Patrick. So let's go to the next slide. We got a limited time. We are going to try to extend these to 45 minutes in the future with the challenges of yesterday and some people traveling around the country. We're going to keep it 30 minutes today.
Yeah. George, I can take this one. I mean, I think everybody's heard me for those repeat ones about the whole de minimis from China and from other countries coming to U.S. I mean, this is really one of the key pieces, actually bipartisan, that has been on the block for the past 18 plus months. There's a bunch of new legislation across the board here on this, and this was really what was stemming the fentanyl piece of safety for de minimis goods coming into the U.S. And for perspective, I always state these just to put everybody in line. And, it's 1.36 billion parcels in 2024 that came into the United States under de minimis. If we take that back to 2015, it was only 125 million. So 10x within 9 years is pretty amazing. So, we understand why that they want to put some guardrails around this. Here's the piece that's interesting. This was announced on April 2nd here, that goods coming in are now subject to applicable duties from China under the $800, which is de minimis is being removed. Postal items we're going to face either a flat duty rate or a 30% value, 25%. Within the past hours, and I'm going to read off some notes here, as part of this escalating U.S.-China trade war, that 30% is now going to be up to 90% of the package's value, or a flat fee per postal item. And if you see here, the flat fee was $25. That flat fee is now going to be $75. So it's either going to be 90% of the value or $75 on that piece.
And Shane, very key in that word, the word postal, because this is where, just because you ship something doesn't mean it's going postal. There are, express clearances. So in the postal methodology, we've got some questions. Is CBP going to be able to handle the volume? This is their way of probably handling volume at scale. They're going to just pre-impose a maximum duty, a maximum penalty, however you want to look at that. And that's my opinion, but I think that's what they're doing to make sure volume makes it through without having to inspect every package.
Yeah. And if you look, the other part too, the flat fee that was set to increase to $50 on this June 1st date, that is now going to $150. So you're now doubling the $75 flat fee now up to $150. So I mean, this is a significant change here. The other part about this whole piece is, and we've been talking about this, is the requirement for additional information on these goods coming over, having the proper HS classification, having the proper country of origin listed, having the proper details of what that specific product is, what are the components of those goods. Again, this has been on the block for a while now. And to your point, George, about all of these legislation that was happening on what do we do with de minimis, et cetera, they were all wondering, well, what's CBP going to do? Do we have enough staffing in order to process these things? What they had kind of kicked around back in January, do we add a flat fee on the goods processing? I'll tell you, I didn't think that they would go up to $75 flat of processing and then in June another $150. But yeah, this is a pretty significant change here, just based upon the volume I mentioned previously of how many parcels coming up in are under de minimis. And about 60% of that 1.36 billion are actually coming. That's the latest estimate of what's actually coming in historically from China on this.
Perfect. I'm going to go to the next one because we got limited time. So this has been a common question, and we're so happy to bring Scott Peterson. So we've been doing work. So Scott, I'm going to turn this over to you to walk through the implications of tariffs. Are tariffs taxable?
Thank you, George. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. So in the United States, the sales tax is based upon what's called the sales price. And the sales price is almost uniformly defined around the United States. And the thing that they all consistently do is prohibit retailers from deducting things that are made up of the retailer's cost from the definition of sales price. They don't want you to deduct the tariff that you paid to somebody from the value of the product that you're selling to somebody if you're going to sell it to them with that tariff built into the price. So if it varies somewhat because it depends on whether or not you are the importer and the tariff is imposed upon you. So if you're but to the extent that you're passing a tariff on to your customers, a retail customer in a state that has a sales tax and it's a product that's subject to sales tax, if you build the tariff into the price of the product, the tariff becomes part of the sales price and is subject to sales tax. If you separately itemize the tariff, it is also subject to sales tax. You can't. No state has a deduction for tariffs from the definition of sales price. I'll give you an example here. I'm not going to go through the math here, but the states are very consistent. One of the very few areas in the sales tax world where the states are very consistent. Sales price means what the retailer paid for the price for the product plus what they're and then what they're selling to the consumer for. So almost exclusively, the tariffs are included in sales price and are sales taxable, and even if you separately state them, they're going to be sales taxable. Now, they may not be subject to use tax. So if you're an importer and you've imported something from a country that you're going to use inside your own business to operate your business, your manufacturing, you've imported a manufacturing good or a piece of manufacturing machinery that you're going to use on your manufacturing floor, the tariff is likely not going to be subject to the use tax that you would owe to that state, because the tariff and the use tax are the tariff and the purchase of the good are two separate transactions. You buy something for $1 million, you put that on your manufacturing floor, you owe your state 6% of that $1 million. That does not include the whatever tariff you had to pay to the customs to get that product into the United States. But those are two different taxes, and it's only in the use tax where those are two separate transactions, and only Scott, if you're the importer.
Scott, if the customer is an exempt sale, I'm assuming the exempt rules would follow the tax. The item would be tax exempt then because they have an exempt status.
Exactly right. Yep. So you can if what you're selling is an exempt product like clothing in Minnesota, not subject to sales tax, then whatever you passed on to your customers, whether you build it into the price of the product or you have a separate line item, should be exempt from the sales tax in Minnesota because the clothing itself is exempt.
Yeah, and there are items we use in the math. We were putting this together, trying to make all the changes as real time, and it just ran out of space here. But there are times when you are importing goods that will be tax exempt. Massachusetts has a shoe exemption on taxability, but golf shoes are not. So remember, depending on how you do this, if you add it to the price of the item and it's not taxable, it just raises the price of the item. But if you add it as a surcharge, from what we can understand from the states and the rulings, and there's one specifically to South Carolina, Scott, you spend a lot of time talking to states, this will increase taxes to a consumer. So the duty is a tax, and then there will be sales tax on top of it. Two separate, one's federal, one's state. Is that a fair assumption there, Scott?
Yes.
So that's not the answer everybody wanted to hear, but that's why we brought in the experts today. So Scott has spent his life in the sales tax world, created the SST program, familiar with that, and is one of the foremost experts in sales tax. So thank you, Scott. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions afterwards as well. They're piling up right now. We won't be able to answer, but we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. So for right now, assume if you're doing a surcharge, it should be taxed based on your state rules. All right.
Yeah, a few questions on this I see in the chat. What's the difference? Country of origin and point of origin. Country of origin is where the product is made. It's where it's processed. It's where it's grown, harvested, assembled. The majority of the work is put in a certain country, and that becomes the country of origin. The point of origin is where it was shipped from. So a garment, for instance, could be manufactured in China, shipped in bulk to, let's say, the UK. A logo is added, a couple of buttons are added. That is not substantial enough for it to be then made in the UK and origin UK. It is still origin China, but it ships from the UK to New York. The UK is the point of origin, but the country of origin is China in that example. There was a question here, and let me just scroll to it. If I buy components from Italy, but the components were actually made in China, and then it's exported from Italy to the UK, what will it be? It will all depend on how much work was actually put in Italy. So if it was just a couple of components, a very small percentage of the components were actually made in China, then if the majority, and indeed the majority of the components and the assembly work was done in Italy, then it will be country of origin Italy. However, if it's the other way around, then it's country of origin China, despite the fact that it was shipped in from Italy. Therefore, the Chinese 104+% will apply to that particular product when it comes into the country. And remember, if country of origin is China, despite it coming from Italy, it will not, there'll be no de minimis. So it'll be dutiable. The full amount will be dutiable.
And Patrick, we put a little note at the bottom for specifically the USMCA, the regional value content and the rules that are required around that to meet those local changes. Shane and I worked with a large retailer based in the Northeast for many years that made clothing, and they would get fabric in from all over the world and reassemble that. They are going to pay a duty on that fabric as it comes into China, which will raise the base cost. But since they're making that fabric into a garment, they are now going to have a new item that will be manufactured in the U.S. So there will be a cost increase, but this is important. This is, if you have questions, please contact a trade broker, a trade lawyer. These are very complicated things that we can't get into specifics on this call with, but these are things that you should be finding out more about from an attorney or a broker. I'm going to advance the slide because we're running low on time. Manufacturing. How do these trade wars impact manufacturing differently than retail? This is all going to be hitting our pockets daily right now. So as we sort of talk about the increasing tariffs, there, regardless if it's made in BMW just issued a statement as well. They have a plant in South Carolina. Those components come globally, so they have to figure out the cost of those components. I think we're going to see a lot of changes over the next 3 to 4 months. Hopefully this will quiet down. But if you do have questions specific to how do my products, how am I importing, Avalara does have tools to help solve some of those things. And on the next week, we'll show you how some of these tools will actually allow you to see the impact of the different tariffs as they progress through time. Anyone any thoughts on this one, Patrick or Shane?
I also think this is a moving piece here, and I think it almost ties into everything that we've been doing recently in terms of our polling questions. In terms of February through March, a lot of these manufacturers were trying to figure out what are they going to do based upon what was happening on April 2nd. I think because of what happened on April 2nd, we should start seeing a lot more news coming out on the manufacturers, some of these other large organizations, and probably several on this call of what are you going to do currently right now in relation to what these changes are doing. And, part of this is diversifying supply chains, taking a look at what the tariff rates are coming out of China versus some of these other markets. The U.S. is really trying to make it to do manufacturing within the U.S., but obviously you're also going to look at, other favorable rates. It's now 124 out of China. Maybe that 37% out of another country is more attractive versus what you were doing previously and versus what the 124 is currently. So, I think we're going to see a lot on the manufacturing front come to fruition here. Okay.
All right, we've got 2 minutes left. I think this is always the greatest topic, and I'll wrap this up over the next 90 seconds. Patrick, I apologize that we had a couple more slides left, but these were hot topics. So, can your business keep up with these changes? Are shipments being held up in customs, penalties and fines for non-compliance, over or under charging customs and duties, poor customer experience, and cart abandonment? I think these are things that are going to affect the business globally. And then, 55% over the last couple of weeks have said this is going to be something that is going to be challenging. So making sure your software is up to date with this. We do live changes. We've got over 200 human beings that are actually making changes to the system. So we were ready for these changes as of the moment they happen. And we've been changing these things all the time. So as we think about this is probably the most important part of the business. As we got a few seconds left, explore diversification in shipping carriers, sources of supply, even ports of entry. LA tends to get backed up, as we know, when there's strikes. This could be a problem here. Automate global trade compliance really is probably the most important thing you can do. They're changing faster now than ever in the history of the world. Work with custom brokers to lean on their network and expertise. also going to be super important. Do they have preferred partners? Do they have local vendors? Things like that will really help you save money, potentially time in transit as well. Ensure product details are compliant with global trade regulations. I've had a lot of interesting questions I've seen in the chat room where people are saying, can we do X? Can we do Y? Those may not be legal, so just be careful when you're asking to try to bend these rules to navigate these. Talk to these experts. Build inventory to absorb short-term headwinds. This is always a solution in the car industry. We saw this in the past where they bring extra cars in. So this is something to think about. Can you do this? Is this available? We're probably too late for this right this second. We're at this peak of this curve. So just be aware of what's going on in the world, and we will follow up. I don't think we have time for this poll question, but we'll run it anyway, and then we can get the results afterwards. So thank you for your time. Anything else, Shane? Patrick?
No, I would also just say, we were trying to get to everybody as much as possible here in terms of hand raisers. I do want to just, not to say that that's invaluable. Please, if you are, let's see here, sorry. This is the quickest way to get to us. If you do raise your hand for yes on this one, we're trying to get back to anybody within 24 hours in relation to any questions you have. As you guys probably all know, we're seeing an influx of inquiries start coming in. Want to make sure these go to the appropriate individuals. So I just want to leave this up to make sure if you need a follow-up from our team, please select yes here. We will try to get to you as quickly as humanly possible based upon everything that's going on.
Great. Thanks, Shane, and to all of our presenters. I can just wrap us up really quick. So thanks everyone for attending today, and thanks for your flexibility as we rescheduled this from yesterday. I was glad to see so many people were able to make it. Next week we will be back on Tuesday like usual. So we hope you can join us then. The link to register is on your screen under additional resources, and it will also be in the post-event email that you'll receive later today. So that is all we have for you today. Thanks for joining, and this concludes today's webinar.